5 years. We opened our doors of our brewery in March of 2011, and in the past couple of years especially, there's hardly a week that goes by that I don't get an email or a tweet or a Facebook message or something saying, can I get your beer in St. Louis or Kansas City? And we're a very small brewery, or we were a very small brewery, so we haven't been able to supply this market, and we didn't want to send beer up here and just tease people. So we're excited that we have partnered with Summit Distributing, and that we are making lots of beer now to come to the St. Louis market. So you guys drink up. If you drink enough, it'll be a while before we get to Kansas City too. So you're the lucky ones. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the brewery and about the history of the brewery. So Brian and I are married. We met in Philadelphia in college back in the 90s, and I grew up in the Ozarks, so Bucyrus is about 2.5 hours from here. We are in the heart of Texas County, where the big Piney River flows, where it begins and flows all through the county and dumps into the Gasconade River. And I left Texas County after high school and was never coming back except maybe to visit my parents, because there was nothing there for me. And I'd go to college in Philadelphia, meet Brian from southern New Jersey. He's like, the Ozarks are a great place. There's hunting, there's fishing, there's outdoor activities, and I want to live there. And so 4 years later, I graduated from college. Brian had already moved back, and we have lived in the Ozarks for almost 20 years together now. So how did we come about starting a brewery? Well, we always enjoyed craft beer. The very first craft beer I ever tried that I remember thinking, this is good, I love this flavor, was Fat Tire. And we would travel around and look for local beer, and we would try to visit any brewery that was around an area where we were traveling. One that really sticks out in our minds, or that made an impression on us, was Brewery Omegang in Cooperstown, New York. We visited there in the early part of 2000s, and we remember, driving out in, this is rural New York, to this big barn out in the country, surrounded by fields. And Omegang at the time had been purchased by Duvel, but they were still a very small brewery, and you couldn't get their beer much outside of New York. So we went in there, and I remember walking around doing the little tour and thinking, this is awesome, a brewery in a barn. So fast forward a few years, Brian and I are home brewing, and we decided to home brew because it was like, we liked beer, and we wanted to be able to try to make our own beer. We like to do creative things. So we started making beer on our kitchen stove and fermenting it in the cellar of our 100-year-old farmhouse. And our friends drank it all up. And for some reason, one night we're sitting around a bonfire drinking a bottle of Omegang's Three Philosophers, and we were like, we should start a brewery. And I don't really know why that necessarily seemed like a great idea, but we were creative people. We were sort of entrepreneurial. I think we're looking for something, a little bit beyond the regular 9 to 5. And we had this 70-year-old barn on our farm that was in great structural condition, and we wanted to figure out something to do with it. And so it was like, well, what do we know how to do that we could do in that barn? Well, we could brew beer in that barn. So in July of 2010, we began hauling about 30-year-old hay out of the loft of that barn and drilling a new well on our property. Now, the interesting thing was, our friends had been drinking our home brew for a long time, drinking all of it, asking for it at parties, etc. We had never entered any homebrew competitions. We weren't members of a homebrew club. We just enjoyed making beer. But we didn't tell any of our friends that we were going to start a brewery because they were going to think we were crazy. And so we started drilling that well, hauled the hay out of the top of the barn, and I started a blog. And I did our first blog post. We're starting a brewery in Bucyrus, Missouri, in this old barn. And I emailed the link to our friends, and I'm like, hey, by the way, just so you know, we're starting a brewery. So it was too late. They could call us crazy. We were doing it. Done deal. We really didn't know how that was going to go to start a brewery in the Ozarks because we're in the heart of bush-like country. And, you know, there's not a lot of craft beer in our area. You could go to our local liquor store and find Sierra Nevada, Schlafly, Boulevard, but, you know, there was nothing, you know, too crazy or outrageous. And it was interesting to us. We got to know our local liquor store owner very early on in our marriage because we went in and we were buying all this, you know, sort of not usual stuff. And he was like, "Who are you guys? Where are you from?" It's like, "Well, we're local, and yeah, we like to drink this kind of beer." So, you know, that isn't really part of our culture in the Ozarks to drink handcrafted beer. But Brian and I thought, we're going to give this a try, see how it works. We began purchasing, or we had purchased a 10-gallon brewing system, a Sabco Brew Magic, that we use for homebrew. And the TTB requires that you have an actual brew house. So we rolled that into this barn that we had renovated and got licensed as a brewery. And it looks like everybody's got float trip. Brian has disappeared. So I'll go into this. The first beer that you have here, this is our float trip ale. Are you ready to talk about it?
I am ready.
Okay.
I am so sorry, folks. All right.
Okay. So wait till we have it. Gotcha. So we opened our doors.
Follow instructions.
Yeah, sorry. We opened our doors on this 10-gallon system, and we put a little thing out on Facebook and said, we're going to be open for a couple of hours on a Saturday. And we're like, we'll see if anybody shows up. We're 2 miles down a gravel road, 10 miles from the nearest town. We're not exactly easily accessible. But people showed up. And Brian and I, of course, had day jobs. We would go to our jobs, come home, brew beer. We were serving it out of corny kegs. And we would think, okay, we've got like 40 kegs of beer. This should last us for a couple of weekends. So we would put something on Facebook and say, we're going to be open this Saturday and next Saturday for 2 or 3 hours. And people would show up and they would drink all of the beer. And it was mostly local people. So there was obviously a very strong interest for us to have our beer locally. But our goal all along had been to be a packaging brewery and make beer that was made in the Ozarks, that was about the Ozarks, and get it out to the rest of the world to share our little bit of the Ozarks with them. And so this is our first Ozarks beer. Now we have it. So following the rules.
Okay, the beer that you have in your hand now is our Float Trip Ale. It is the lightest offering from Piney River Brewing. It comes in at 4.5% ABV. It is about 18 IBUs. And this beer is a beer that we started out brewing right from the beginning. And we brewed this beer, and it was called originally Ozark Firefly Wheat. We found out that there were a lot of other beers in the country that use the name Firefly, and there actually started to be a few legal disputes over that. So we quickly backed off of that, renamed the beer, and marketed it to our distributors because there were so many wheat beers on the market, they really didn't want another wheat beer. This is a wheat-based blonde ale. And that's pretty much how we got it on the shelves past our distributors. We marketed this beer as a blonde ale. That worked out really well. At first, we were selling this beer as a seasonal. About 3 to 4 months after the beer came out as a seasonal as Float Trip Ale, we entered this beer into the World Beer Cup in the American Style Wheat category. Well, it won. And it won gold as Best American Style Wheat Beer in the world. That was at the latest World Beer Cup. So then, you know, the secret was out, I guess, to our distributors. And it was like, wait a minute here. I thought you said this beer was a blonde ale. And I'm like, well, it is a blonde ale. And, you know, it's right on the line as far as the percentage of wheat that's in it. And, okay, yeah, that's not me. Sorry about that. And anyway, we were able to kind of hit both categories there. And any questions on this beer?
Thank you. So the Float Trip Ale is our, homage to what everybody loves to do in the Ozarks, which is go on a float trip. So if you travel around the U.S., out in Colorado, they raft, and other places they canoe or whatever. But in the Ozarks, we all go on float trips. And we felt like that was the perfect name for a light, easy drinking beer. And Brian and I have tested this beer out. You can drink it all day on a float trip and still get out of your canoe. That's not possible with our IPA. Just saying. So you've been warned. So going back to our story about the brewery, we had great love and success as this very small 10-gallon brewery. People were showing up, drinking us out of all of our beer. Brian and I were out, brewing beer, cleaning kegs, doing all this till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning every night when we would come home from work. And we're like, this is not sustainable. So we quickly decided to pursue an SBA loan. And it had been our goal all along to be a packaging brewery. And we decided we were going to get a larger brew house and fermentation equipment. And we also wanted to can our beer. So we're in the middle of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, the Mark Twain National Forest. Many years ago, someone had brought us this beer from Colorado that they had come across. It was called Dale's Pale Ale. And Brian and I got a hold of this beer. We're like, oh my gosh, this is beer in a can, and it has flavor. Tastes really good. This is awesome. Why can't we get it in Missouri? So back in 2011, there were very few craft breweries that were canning. And part of the reason was because it was very hard to get a hold of a canner that was, made on more of a small level. And also, when you purchase cans, you have to purchase a semi-truckload of printed cans at one time. So it's a pretty big commitment. If you're going to can a beer, you better believe that this beer is going to sell in the marketplace, because you're going to have thousands of those cans. So, but we also felt like we're a small brewery. We've got to do something that's going to differentiate us from our competitors, and we have to do something that is going to be portable in nature, because we're out in the middle of nature. And what's the point of having great craft beer in the Ozarks if you can't enjoy it in the places that you want to be in the Ozarks? And around that time, there was a engineering firm in Boulder, Colorado called Wild Goose that was next to Upslope Brewing. And Upslope had a canning machine that they had problems with, and Wild Goose would go over and work on it. And they told the Wild Goose folks, hey, why don't you build us a canner that is built for a small brewery? And Wild Goose began working on this canning machine, and Brian was on a brewing forum and saw that this information about this canning machine that was being made for small brewers, and was there an interest in that? And we were very interested. And we began talking with them, and actually had this SBA loan. We got our new brew house, and we purchased the 5th Wild Goose canning machine that was available. So this canning machine is everywhere now. Four Hands has one here in St. Louis. Some the craft breweries that are doing some canning, but they don't have their own canning machine, a mobile unit will come in and can for them. And those are typically Wild Goose machines. But we were actually the first craft brewery in Missouri to can beer at our brewery in November of 2011. So the first beers that we canned were our Amber Ale and our IPA. And we felt like those were two beers. IPA, it seemed like, hops were something that people were really passionate about, so we wanted to have a hoppy beer. And our Amber Ale was really easy drinking, and it was kind of one of those beers that craft beer lovers like, but it could kind of be a gateway beer for people that weren't necessarily into craft beer. And, what was the first craft beer I liked? It was Fat Tire, which is an Amber Ale. So those are the two that we went with. We packaged our first beer and sent it out in November of 2011. Our first distribution was in southern Missouri, and that distributor actually has the Lake of the Ozarks, and they go almost to Kansas City. So they began slowly sending our beer out into the marketplace, and we began having more people show up at our tap room and asking for our beer. And in the fall of 2011, we went to our first beer festival, which was with Public House Brewing, which just recently came to the St. Louis market. And we made a special beer for that festival called Black Walnut Wheat. And Brian's going to tell you about that beer.
Thank you, Joleen.
I set you up there.
You did. I like that. That was a nice handoff.
I'm learning.
Impressive. I'm learning. She's doing better. So the beer that you have in your hand now, this is our Black Walnut Wheat beer. This is a American-style dark wheat brewed with black walnuts in the mash. This beer is also 4.5% and comes in at 18 IBUs. From what you're looking at in your hand and what you're going to taste are going to be two total different things. You get the perception of, a dark beer, maybe, fairly heavy. This beer drinks like a very light wheat beer, and it's as a play on black walnut wheat that we turn this beer dark. We use two ways we turn this beer dark. One is we use midnight wheat, which midnight wheat gives this beer color without all the roasted flavors associated with, a porter or a stout. And then we also add a natural malt colorant called Cinnamar, which is by Wireman. And it's basically, it's a liquid malt that also adds color without adding all the roasted flavors that would normally be associated with that. So the black walnuts are added in the mash. Brewing with nuts can be, a little bit problematic due to the oils in the nuts. The way that we get around that in some of the test batches on this beer, we brewed it and put the nuts in the boil kettle, which then, of course, gave you nothing but an oil slick on top. By adding them in the mash, basically, that mash bed, it works as a filter, and it is actually grabbing those oils, allowing the flavor, the aroma to go through, but grabbing the oils and leaving that behind, and that's kind of what makes that beer work with brewing with the nuts. And as Joleen was saying, we brewed this beer for a beer festival at the Public House. It was their very first year in business, our first year in business, and they had their annual Oktoberfest. We went to that. We wanted to brew something special for it. We wanted to use native ingredients, and black walnuts are very prevalent in the Ozarks.
I grew up picking up black walnuts as a kid. I mean, that's, you pick up a truck bed load and you get like $15. It's great fun. Everyone should do it.
So anyway, we brewed that beer for the festival, took it there. It was like the first keg to blow that day. We're like, that was interesting. I think people may have liked it. So we went back, brewed some more, put it on tap in our tap room. We're like, hey, we think we have our first fall seasonal here. End of fall, we pulled it off. All the regulars about rioted. And they're like, wait a minute, where's the black walnut wheat? We want it back. So for our 1-year anniversary, we rebrewed this beer and had it there at the 1-year anniversary, and we've been brewing it ever since. It is actually our top seller in package form and draft. Any questions on this beer?
So Missouri is the #1 walnut producer in the nation. If you don't already know that, the #1 black walnut producer. And black walnuts are all hand harvested. There are no black walnut orchards. People go out and pick them up out of fields and out of their yards. And like in our area, there will be people that set up hulling stations. So you have your buckets and your burlap bags and your pickup bed loads, and you go to these hulling stations. You drop off the nuts. They hull them and bag them up and weigh them, and then you get paid by the hundredweight. This year it's $13 a hundredweight. So there's a lot of love that goes into every black walnut, and that's why they're pretty expensive if you go to buy them on the store shelves. And we get all of our black walnuts from Hammond's Processing, which is in Stockton, Missouri. So this is very much a local ingredient, and we're really proud that it's our #1 beer because we really feel like there's nothing more Ozarks than a black walnut. Thank you. So continuing on a little bit more with the Piney River story, we began, yes. Black walnut wheat. Black walnut wheat, yeah. And as Brian said, we began brewing it year-round at our 1-year anniversary. Yes.
You know, it's really funny. It's something that we were thinking also. We were concerned about that. You know, it's something that you run into with hops, and we found that it stuck around. It is really, it's really unique, and I don't know if anyone picked up on the fact, if you've had black walnuts before and how they come across in, like, say, a cookie or ice cream or black walnut cake. It's really kind of different what you're getting here. There's almost a fruitiness to it, and we really think it has something to do with the transformation in that mash process and the temperature and just the process that it's going through that brings forth a little bit of a fruitiness. And it's kind of unique. It's a flavor and aroma of black walnut, but yet still, you know, something that is almost undescribable. Yes, sir. Just the nut meats. And the way that we purchase them from Hammond's Products, it works out really well because they have like their grade A fancy black walnuts that they can sell for a lot of money. Then during that whole processing that they do, they end up with a bunch of black walnut bits, and they call them baking bits, and that's what we use in the mash. Yes, sir. I like this. You guys are doing great. No priming sugar. Yeah. This beer is force carbed. Yes, sir. Awesome. Hey there, John. Anyway, basically, we have two ways that we can carbonate that beer. We can use priming sugar, and, you know, basically then you're dealing with, you know, the sugars that are left behind, or the sugar that you're adding and the yeast that's left behind there to go ahead and carbonate that beer in the bottle, you know, and you're dealing with temperatures, and, you know, you can get real close, but it's not going to always be exactly the same. And by force carbing, we actually have they call it a stone. We have some that are stainless steel, some that are ceramic, and basically they're just little tiny pores that we inject CO2 into the beer in little fine bubbles, and we do it slowly. Otherwise, you would get big bubbles in your beer, and it just doesn't drink as well. And so we force carb it slowly to a certain volume of CO2 that we want. Most of our beers are carb to 2.5, and that's the difference between the two.
And Brian, you have right down there our taste of fall.
I should start talking about this.
You're going to keep going.
Or I will be on the bad list. Okay, we have, at Piney River, we do 4 seasonal beers. Right now, we're coming toward the end of our fall seasonal. But in our launch, you know, it was time to, this is what we had. We didn't have our winter seasonal out yet. Our fall seasonal is sweet potato ale. So, you know, a lot of fall seasonal.
The crowd goes wild. It's like I told him I was pregnant or something. Oh. I love that.
That'll make me drink.
Thank you.
Anyway, our fall seasonal, when it came time to make a fall seasonal, there's lots of great pumpkin beers out there. There was really nothing that I felt that I could add to that. And I was like, I don't need to make another pumpkin beer. But we wanted something that, you know, kind of gave fall spices. And we decided to brew with sweet potatoes. Around Thanksgiving, whenever I have a choice, Joleen will ask me, you know, hey, Brian, do you want a pumpkin pie or do you want a sweet potato pie? And 9 times out of 10, I'm going to say I want a sweet potato pie. Woo!
It is, really.
Now we're having church.
Yeah, that's right.
So anyway, this beer, it's a blonde base. It is 6% ABV. This beer is 20 IBUs, and it is brewed with 10 pounds of roasted sweet potato per barrel, and it has cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla in it. And as far as the proportions of each, the way I did that whenever we designed this beer, I based it 100% on that sweet potato pie recipe of Joleen's. So as I was trying to figure out, the spice profile and how to go about it, I was like, well, this pie tastes really good. And, if it had too much cinnamon or too much nutmeg or too much vanilla, it would be out of balance. And I'm like, obviously, this balance is working. So that's what I went with, and that's what's in this beer.
I'm curious, is there anybody in the room that doesn't like sweet potatoes, that doesn't eat sweet potatoes?
Okay.
That just doesn't eat them? I'm one of those people.
And how's the beer working for you?
I'm just kind of curious, is there anybody that doesn't like sweet potatoes that also doesn't like the beer? You can be honest.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
please.
Fair? Yeah, drinkable, but I wouldn't. It's not my favorite. Is that, for me,
No, that's fair.
I'm the cook in the house, so it doesn't matter that I don't like sweet potatoes because my wife doesn't cook, so it's all good. But I don't get sweet potatoes out of this at all. I get like caramel and I get like the fall spice and the caramel thing, and I don't taste sweet potatoes here. I don't know about anybody else. And obviously, nobody really picked that.
What's that?
I do, and I love it.
Okay.
Honestly, is there anybody that picked out sweet potatoes in this beer that didn't already know was in here? Oh. Yeah, well, of course you did. You know it's a sweet potato beer. I mean, they could use some marshmallows.
A little bit of marshmallow on top. Okay.
Kind of curious what everybody thought of sweet potatoes in general and how you compare it to the beer. I think it's awesome.
I have not.
Thank you.
I mean,
Yes,
kind
sir.
of warm.
Okay.
Right. No, the yeast used in that would not grow banana. No. Sure, exactly. And I will say that, the sweet potatoes in this beer, the main thing you really get out of them is the color. Yeah, the color in that beer is really coming from the roasted sweet potato. Yes, sir. Yes, we do. Yes.
Yeah, early on, when we first made this, we started out to take out. Well, that doesn't take that many potatoes, and then Brian goes to Walmart and buys like a shopping cart of sweet potatoes and brings them home and is like, I need you to roast these because we're gonna brew this tomorrow. Do you know how long it takes and what it does to your oven to roast
It's not
pounds?
pretty.
Yeah, I was like, this isn't gonna work. So we did have a local restaurant that, of course, had big commercial oven, and they roasted all of our sweet potatoes. And now that we're in our new brew house, we are how many? 600.
It's a lot
Yeah.
of sweet potatoes it takes to
Call
brew
up
a
your
full batch
local
now.
restaurateur and be like, I need you to roast me 600 pounds of sweet potatoes. And so that's kind of fun. That's a lot of sweet potatoes.
Any other questions on the beer? Well, I will go ahead and take this quick moment to mention that, this is one of our 4 seasonals, and just quickly take you through the other seasons. Coming up next will be our winter seasonal, which is an amber-based beer brewed with dates and chipotle chili pepper called Hot Date. Yes, sir. Yep, on tap right now. In the spring, we do a traditional cream ale. I look at it as almost like a pre-prohibition style cream ale. That is called Crankbait, which is based on, we do a lot of hunting and fishing down the Ozarks, and it has a little Rebel Crawdad Crankbait on the label. In the summer, our summer seasonal is a blonde ale brewed with honey and basil that we call Hobby Farm. And then, of course, that brings you around to fall with the sweet potato ale.
Yeah, so all of our seasonal beers, and really all of our beers, Brian and I have really tried to make things that are drinkable. I mean, we're, like I said, we're in the middle of an area where there's hardly a weekend that goes by that we don't get people in our tap room that have never tried craft beer. And, they come in and you're like, well, what do you like to drink? Well, I drink Bud Light. Okay, well, let's start off with this Float Trip Ale. And Float Trip and Black Walnut, it's a toss-up. Those two are going to be our biggest sellers in our tap room. We've done, crazy firkins and stuff, and people are like, oh, that's good, but I'll take a Black Walnut. So, we really try to brew things that are very, drinkable, no matter where you're at. So, and all of our seasonals kind of follow along that line as well. So, as I said, we started distributing our beer through a local distributor. We branched out into Southwest Missouri, Southeast Missouri, Arkansas over the past 5 years or 4.5 years. And we never had moved into the metropolitan areas because we knew that we couldn't make enough beer. And meanwhile, we won some awards that were very big and, got us some notoriety. And all along, we thought, we just want to be a brewery that brews beer for the Ozarks and for the people in Missouri. And we very much admire breweries that are making great beer and they can only make enough for their local markets. And that's our goal, is to ultimately just stay here in Missouri and make beer. But our little 7-barrel brew house was not going to be able to do that. So last fall, actually it was last October, we put a deposit down on a brand new brew house, and we began building a 12,000 square foot bigger barn on our farm. And so that's what has enabled us to be here in St. Louis and bring you this Old Tom Porter, which also happened to win the gold at the 2013 Great American Beer Festival in the brown porter category.
Thank you.
That was the first competition we ever entered. So
that was kind of an interesting thing for us because, like Joleen said, when we first started, we did not enter homebrew contest. We just brewed our beer. So the very first contest we ever entered was the Great American Beer Festival and left with a gold for our porter. So we were beyond excited about that. So the beer that you have in your hand now, it is a traditional English-style brown porter. This beer is 5.5% ABV. The IBU on this is 30. And basically in porter world, you've got your brown porters, your robust porters, your Baltic porters, and this is going to be on the lighter end of all three of those. Sometimes people will drink it and they're used to robust porters and Baltic porters, and they'll say, I don't get it. This thing's just a brown ale. And it's like, well, no, it is a brown porter. So it is an actual style. I would say, it's really close to the traditional English porters that were made years ago. One of the key characteristics in this beer, we use a lot of brown malt in it. And that's not a malt that's really used a lot. And that's what kind of adds a little bit of smokiness. Brown malt's not really a smoked malt, but it kind of adds a little smokiness to the beer. Yes, sir. Yes. There is no coffee in it. Yeah. Actually, there is. You're probably picking up a little coffee, a little chocolate, and there is none of any of that in there. So that is coming from. And actually, this is a good time to mention this when it comes to the way they roast malt. Is really similar to the way they roast a coffee bean. And, I realize that, what we perceive in coffee and what we're tasting and believe is coffee, we're really tasting roast. I've never tried a green coffee bean. I don't know what it tastes like, but I'm sure it tastes nothing like a roasted coffee bean. So that would kind of explain why you're getting those coffee flavors. Is because they roast that grain a little longer, and that gives you the perception of coffee. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Just so you know, I've tried a green coffee bean.
Yes.
You don't do it twice.
All right.
I have too.
I figured that. That's probably why I've
You're
never
right.
tried.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes. We do not. Our malt comes from Brewer Supply Group out of Shakopee, Minnesota, and the majority of our malt is coming from the Dakotas, Canada. In our porter, though, the grain bill in that is there's a lot of Maris Otter, and that actually comes from England.
So as I mentioned, we are building on, or we have built on to our brewery. Brian and I were faced with the conundrum of, we're on this 80-acre farm in the Ozarks, and we have this really cool place that we're brewing beer, and that we love to bring people down to visit our tap room, and it's got a really neat vibe, but we need to grow. But there's, what do we do? Well, we just decided, screw it. We're just going to build a 12,000 square foot bigger barn right next to our little barn. You can see a picture of that on the little card that we put in your chair before you came in. And we built this summer and put a new brew house in there, new 60-barrel fermentation vessels and bright tanks. We put in a much bigger Wild Goose canning line. Our original canning line did about 18 cans a minute. Our new canning line does about 80 cans a minute. So it is really spitting out some cans, which is a great thing. It's because we had to get beer to St. Louis. And we will officially brew on our new brew house on Monday. So our new brew house is from Creveller Corporation. It was actually made in Niagara Falls, Ontario. And it has two 15-barrel boil kettles. So all of our fermentation vessels and bright tanks, they're all 60-barrel vessels. And we will basically do one batch and immediately double batch and ultimately quadruple batch into one fermentation or bright tank. Yes? Earthbound Brewing has purchased our old system, so they will be coming to get it here shortly. They heard that it maybe made some award-winning beer, so they're going to give themselves a whirl on that, and we're really happy for them. Our original brew system actually came from Big Muddy Brewing. We bought it from Chuck when he put in a 15-barrel system, and so we're passing it along. We're really glad to keep it local. They're also buying our canning line as well. So, yes? The difference in the cost?
Well, actually, I really couldn't tell you what a bottle cost because, we've never bottled and, never even priced them because I made up my mind I was not doing it. I can tell you that overall, canning is less expensive, and especially when you add in the cost of freight. When you're shipping bottled beer, you're shipping the beer and the bottle. And, of course, then whenever, and the weight of that, and whenever you're ordering those in, they're a lot heavier than cans. So, really, when we're shipping out the canned beer, the cans are really negligible as far as the weight. We're really just shipping beer. So, overall, the cost of canning versus bottling is less expensive.
Yeah,
a little more startup cost in canning.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that normally takes a brewery a little longer to decide they're going to do, because you can buy a lot of older used bottling lines, but not really with canning lines.
Well, and the beauty of the cans too is that, or one of the issues with canning is that you have to order a large amount of cans that are already printed. So like I said, you really have to believe in your brand. Now, if you do on our seasonals, they are labeled like a bottle. So this is a blank, what they call a bright can, and then we label them. So that way we can kind of change up our seasonals. We have a labeling machine. So as the cans are coming off the canning line, it goes through the labeling machine just like a bottle would.
But the cans come in already made.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, the porter is all Fuggle hops. The black walnut wheat and the float trip are Bravo, and both of those beers are just single hopped right at the beginning, and that's it. The sweet potato is also Bravo. I really like that as a bittering hop. It's a very nice, clean, high alpha but clean bittering hop. We like what we get out of Bravo.
You're getting ready to have it.
It is on its way. Yes, it's on its way. So that I don't get in trouble, I can't talk about that beer till I have it in my hand.
But rumor has it that
Yes, sir.
a beer that's dry hop.
Boom! The beer that you have in your hand and I have in my hand is dry hop. Yes, and anyway, right now you have our Missouri Mule India Pale Ale. It's an American-style IPA. This beer is 70 IBUs, 7% ABV. So we kind of like, it was kind of funny that you just mentioned that because we just left the whole, 20 IBUs, very lightly hopped, not dry hopped. This beer is, the bittering hop in this is Columbus, and then it is hopped throughout with Cascade, Citra, and Centennial. There's a lot of late Citra and Centennial, and then it's dry hopped with Citra and Centennial. Any questions on it?
We do have a couple more hoppy beers. We make a pale ale called Bronzeback Pale Ale that you'll see in this market later this year. And we also make a black rye IPA called Masked Bandit. And that will be in the market later this year. And those are also very, very hoppy beers as well.
Yes. It is not. Yeah, there is a reason. We've been doing it as a special, kind of like a special release type beer, really for no other reason than we've been brewing it on our small 7-barrel system, and we haven't had the fermentation space to fit it in and basically take something else that has a ton of orders and say, we're not going to get this to our distributor because we really want to make this. And that's been the reason. So as we have more fermentation space with our additional capacity that we're adding, you will see more of that beer. As a brewer, and whenever I'm at events, beer festivals, I always get asked, what's your favorite beer? What do you like? What do you like? And it's like, you're asking me to pick my favorite child. That may be my favorite child. I really do like that beer. It is hopped with Centennial and Amarillo, and really, really like that beer. And then going to the other hoppier beer Joleen was talking about, our Bronzeback Pale Ale. It comes in at about 30 IBUs, and it is 5.5%, and it has lots of late Galaxy and Citra. So lots of hop flavor, but not very bitter. And it's always fun to have someone come up to you and say, well, I really don't like hoppy beers. And you give them that, and they're like, oh, my God, this tastes so good. And I'm like, well, that's the hops. It's just that the way we use them, really you don't like bitter beers. It's not you don't like hoppy beers. You don't like bitter beers. So, how you use the hops can really make a huge difference in, whether you're getting the bitter side of the hop or the flavor side of the hop. Yes, sir. No. Yeah, including taproom employees, there's 10 other employees. We have 2 full-time brewers that are on staff, and then we have 3 other people that work on the brewing side as far as, helping with packaging, keg cleaning, shipping, all the other stuff that's involved.
Brian and I still have our day jobs.
Yes, that's
one that, we're not a brewery that has investors. We are the investors. So, we love craft beer. We love this industry that we've gotten involved in. It's become very, it's exploding. I think when Brian and I started, there were about 1,800 breweries in the nation, craft breweries in the nation, and now it's over 4,000. And so, we've seen a lot of things change, and there's not some investment group or some private equity firm that we're answering to. we're doing what we love and we're brewing what we love. And we hope that we're imparting that, and we're so happy to share that with you. And I think we're getting ready to have like a little trivia here. We've got a few
Maybe,
giveaways.
possibly. You think so?